With a vision to raise awareness and preserve the stories of those who were enslaved, the Slave Dwelling Project is changing the narrative of American history. We are happy to be joined by the project's executive director and founder, Joseph McGill. Joseph, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And can you give us an overview of what the Slave Dwelling Project is?
Yes, it's a very simple concept. We find slave dwellings wherever they are in the U.S., and we ask the owners if we could spend the night in these spaces to bring attention to these spaces, because once upon a time you could go to historic sites, you could hear all about the beautiful, nice, big house, the architectural significance, place settings, vaulted ceilings, things of this nature. You could hear about the people who inhabited the spaces of the big houses, but very seldom would you hear about the spaces where the enslaved people live. So the Slave Dwelling Project brings attention to these places by performing a simple act of sleeping in them.
Okay, so it's an overnight. You stay overnight in these slave dwellings. And when did you start this?
2010. We've been around for 14 years now, 14 years this year. Started at Magnolia Plantation, our very first sleepover. We've gone to about 25 states and the District of Columbia, spending nights in slave dwellings.
Okay. So what was the inspiration to start sleeping in these slave dwellings and overall starting this project?
The inspiration was what was not there, or what I was taught, or lack thereof. 1979, when I graduated from high school, I was under the impression that my enslaved ancestors were happy to be enslaved, and the enslavers were good people to them. None of that's true. Because I became a park ranger at Fort Sumter National Monument, I had to do the research to, of course, do that job. And in that research, I discovered the agency of my enslaved ancestors, the fact that they were a proud people of that period in history, and they need to be represented and represented well through the research that has been done to date.
The experience of staying overnight in a slave dwelling, what else do you get from that experience? It's not just sleeping in this place, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the bait. It arouses your attention. And initially it was kind of just that, bringing attention to these places, but it has evolved. It has become a lot more than just sleeping in these places, because now others join me. And before we can do the sleepover, we have to have conversations around a campfire. And that's the substance of what we do now, is those conversations that we have about Confederate monuments and the Confederacy and historical trauma. And of course, things that are discussed now, the elephant in the room now is, anti-critical race theory and anti-woke and the death of George Floyd. And we talk about all these things around the campfire. And so now, in this evolution, we do that. And we do living history. Okay. Living history in the sense that once upon a time, one could come to such a site and see things being demonstrated, such as brick making and blacksmithing and cooking, but they were done by white people. Historically, that was not the case. We were doing that. It was our enslaved ancestors doing that. So now we have a team of living historians that I now travel with to some of these sites, if indeed the hosts would like those products.
Wow, and so over the past 14 years, you've made a lot of great steps forward with this project. Is there anything you're working on right now? Any recent developments or research?
Yeah, I'm going to go be sleeping on the Amistad real soon. The Amistad, during the time of slavery, slave ships coming into the U.S., one of these ships was commandeered by the enslaved people on the ship, and they made it to the U.S., had a court case, and they were set free to go back to Africa for the ones who wanted. So there's a replica ship. I'm going to be sleeping on that ship real soon, so that's going to be an experience. But now we're also working on our conference. Our conference will be in a northern state for the first time. We've had 7 conferences so far. They've been in southern states. But because slavery existed in those northern states also, we want this conference to highlight the fact that slavery existed, and we're going to be getting this into some of the details of how it existed in those northern states.
And now this conference is happening in October, right? And it's in Philadelphia?
Philadelphia, October 3rd through the 5th.
Wonderful. And now, before we let you go, I have to talk to you about this book that you wrote, Sleeping with the Ancestors, How I Followed the Footprints of Slavery. Does this kind of cover your initial steps in the slave dwelling project?
Yes. I co-wrote this book with Herb Frazier, also local. It's Herb's fourth book is my first, and it is a chronicle of what I've been doing with the slave dwelling project. It takes you through phases. We talk about slavery in northern states. We talk about the fact that 12 of our former presidents were slave owners, 8 of whom owned slaves while they were in office. Institutions for higher learning, how they were involved in slavery, National Park Service, how they are now involved, the resistance of our enslaved ancestors. It's thoroughly researched, so I encourage this book.
Yeah. And now you can get it on Amazon, wherever books are sold, right?
Amazon, and if you like the sound of my voice, you can get the audio version if you want to listen to me for 85,000 words.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us, Joseph, and we'll put all that information where you can learn more about the Slave Dwelling Project below, and also the conference that's coming up. I want to thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're back after this.